Why, yes, playing through Bonanza made me want to do another Donkey Kong game on the channel. What made you think that? Because you're right, but what made you think that? Hello everyone and welcome to Let's Play Donkey Kong for the Game Boy, otherwise known as Donkey Kong 94. Though, and this might have just been my brain misinterpreting something or swapping some things over the years, I swear I remember a lot of people calling this game Donkey Kong 95 when I first heard about it, despite, I think, every notable release date for the game, at least on the original Game Boy, taking place in 94. Notably, right there, I did skip a demo that showcases what Mario can do in this specific game, but I think it's best to showcase that ourselves. Let's get right on in with a good old nostalgic level. Starting off with good old 25 meters. If you never played Donkey Kong, it's a pretty straightforward platformer. You avoid barrels that Donkey Kong's throwing at you alongside springs, fire enemies that'll chase you, jump over barrels, climb ladders, and make your way to save Pauline up at the top of any given stage, and you're good. Don't get right next to Donkey Kong, though, because he can also kill you. So the way I just cleared the first stage there is how you're probably going to clear it on a first time, especially if you're very used to the arcade version. However, the fact that this score screen exists at all indicates there's some differences here. Let's showcase the way I usually actually play this first stage whenever I revisit it. So, yeah, a little bit more athletic. Mario here in Donkey Kong 94 has much more movement utility than basically any other game he had been in up to this point. Because keep in mind, this predates Mario 64. This game is technically not only the debut of Mario's backflip, or side hop in some definitions, it's also technically the debut of his triple jump, albeit it does work pretty differently here. With that said, for the early stages, I tend to just rely on the backflip a lot. The way you do that is move one direction, then immediately tap the opposite direction on the D-pad and the jump button at the same time, and it'll actively go higher than your main jump can ever hope to reach, hence why you can just skip through these stages pretty quickly. Second stage there introduces a new ladder type that slowly moves up and down to be a complete ladder or not, but thankfully you just need to reach the top layer of that one. Meanwhile, 75 meters here is probably actively the most famous stage in the game, given this is the one that also became a smash stage several times in a row. The one-ups you see are pretty straightforward, they just give you an extra life. However, the items we can collect, like the hat or eventually the purse and umbrella, are more for score alongside some bonus minigames that'll become more relevant after the fourth level. Speaking of which, 100 meters here is definitely one of the more unique levels even in the original Donkey Kong, as the goal here isn't so much to reach Pauline and DK, but instead to remove the supports on the platform to make it fall so you can do damage. You can grab the hammers here to take care of the fire enemies, but I just try to actively get around them because Mario's agile enough in this specific level, especially just to get around it. So as funny as it would be just to do a 3-minute LP, we're not done yet. That might be where technically the original Donkey Kong ended, but we have technically over 90 levels to go. Donkey Kong 94 might just start as more or less a straight-up remake with some new mechanics, but with the addition of this key, modern fans of certain other spin-offs might immediately recognize what this game actually technically is. Worth noting while we approach the first main world, though, I'm actively playing this via the Super Game Boy, hence the added color in the border. But because I like to fill the black bars on the side of the video just to fit a 16:9 ratio, having a border next to a border would be a little bit redundant. So for the rest of the LP, we're zooming in like this and just moving the rest of the sides away. Now, while there is still a lot more to see, the cutscene we just watched actively explained the core conceit of every level in the game moving forward. Every level is effectively a puzzle where your goal is to get the key and to walk it over to the door. You need to pick it up like it's a vegetable in Mario 2 USA, but that's as easy as just getting on top of the key and pressing down the B button. Along the way, you can do a lot of things to get points, like jumping over enemies, jumping over hazards, grabbing the 3 items and all that. But the main thing you actively want to focus on is doing a level decently quickly, as the timer you have left on the top left at the end of a level is added to the little scoreboard that's coming up, and at the end of every 4 levels, like we saw a few moments ago, those are tallied up where every 100 is worth an extra life, including with the remainder as well. So with that 131, I would technically get 2 lives. The main purpose of the 3 pickups in every stage, the purse, the parasol, and the hat, are that you can actively grab them for points, yes, but if you get all 3, you get an extra bonus game of a couple different varieties to get some extra lives. Sometimes it's a slot machine, sometimes it's just a timing the A button press kind of deal. I get a lot of the 3 items early on in the game just to showcase the mechanic, but around like World 2 or 3, I just start ignoring them because I already have more than enough lives at that point. This level introduced a new mechanic though, namely there's a lot of electric wires or ropes you can grab onto in the game and swing yourself vertically on. The longer you hold the up button, the faster you'll rotate, and the higher you'll ultimately jump when you release the jump button. With that said, there's times where you actively need to time your speed on that, so you're actively not going so fast as to hit a lower platform you're trying to hit in the case there's several in a row. Like I mentioned earlier, Mario does also have a triple jump, but I'm going to talk more about that specifically whenever we reach a level where I use it, as it's a little bit funky. Speaking of a little bit funky, let's also talk about the hammers. Like in the original Donkey Kong, you grab a hammer, you just start swinging it wildly and take care of any enemy in your way. With that said, respect the swing animation, as the hammer will only kill enemies when it's actively down on the floor. When it's up in the air, you are still very vulnerable to damage, and since Mario is a one-hit point wonder in this game, if you run into an enemy while it's up in the air, that's your own fault. With that said, the hammers themselves are timed, I think, even on an individual basis, so you only have them for a certain amount of time before they fade out of your hands. But a new thing they added for them here in DK94 is that you can press the B button to throw them straight up in the air. And if you do that with a platform above you and you get up to that platform in time, you can actively catch it and continue using it. And I want to say that might also not reduce its timer, but I don't know if I'm exactly right on that because the timer is relatively short anyway, so I've never been too sure. This is the timing-based 1-up bonus minigame. Press the A button whenever you're ready, and it'll just slowly stop and decide whether or not you get 1, 2, or in some cases even 3 ups in a row. Time for our first proper boss stage. Every 4 levels we run into a 1v1 against Donkey Kong in some way or manner, and this first one here in the main levels at least is a pretty straightforward race to the finish with the timer. Keep in mind all the debris that can fall from the ceiling whenever Donkey Kong jumps, and you should be fine. It definitely gets a little more dangerous when you're on longer ladders or towards the top of the stage because you have less time to react to what's dropping down, but at the same time, you have more than enough ways to get around things. Every 4 stages is also when they actively tally your timer scores up to that point to get extra lives. And it's due to these specific extra lives that you can really easily quickly max out your lives, because I'm getting 5 1-ups there alone. And given that some worlds will have 3 or 4 little cutscenes like this as you go, yeah, it's a pretty good way to stock up. Speaking of which, in my first playthrough, these cutscenes were probably my favorite part of the game on the whole, because there's a good amount of humor to them all the same, but also I think they're a really fun way for the game to tutorialize its mechanics, because they'll actively show you how they work before you get to use them yourself. Because the block that Mario just used there is going to be the focus of the next 4 levels in some form or manner. The way these work is that there's a main platform spawner you need to jump into. Upon doing so, time will freeze and you get to move a cursor around. Pressing A at that point will place the platform type, whatever it is, at that location, and then a timer will start up, hence the music change, before it fades. Placing subsequent platforms like the one I just pressed as well as the one up there will extend the timer as they all share one universal one. There's a few types of these in the game, but for right now we're largely going to be working with ones that either go entirely horizontal or entirely vertical. The horizontal ones will cover the entirety of a row of tiles until they hit a wall. Meanwhile, the vertical ones will do the same thing vertically and act as ladders instead. With that said, there's also some pretty fun plays you can do with those, because you can place some platforms directly below you to save yourself from fall damage. You can block doors with them in some cases. There's a lot of fun tricks you can do with those if you know the level design well enough. And since I mentioned that, yeah, worth noting, Mario does have fall damage in this game. With small falls, you'll just land on the floor outright. Medium falls to relatively high falls, you'll be stunned on the floor unconscious for a few seconds, which means you're open for timers to end or enemies to walk into you. But a high enough fall, which I think even maybe the top of this might count as that, you'll just outright die. And towards late game, I think that's probably one of the most common ways for me to die specifically, so you really need to watch out for that. Yeah, this is what I mean. If you just place more and more platforms like the 4 we've placed across this level, they all share the same timer, so setting down a new one resets that timer back up to its max time. And there's times where you can really game that in your advantage, and there's times the game wants you to game that to your advantage. As the early game here is pretty straightforward. There's solutions either that are intended or as side solutions in the late game that are pretty damn devious. Oh, also, worth noting, there's a point later on in the LP, I think towards the start of World 4 or 5, maybe World 6, where my life count on the bottom right of the stage select is going to jump, I think maybe downwards even, maybe upwards, I don't quite remember. That's because as I was about to record the world in question that I just mentioned, I noticed that in OBS I had the footage cropped incorrectly. In specific, Like 2/3 of the bottom row of tiles right now, I think, was completely off screen as a comparison. So I actively had to go back and re-record everything after 100 meters all the way up to there. Which was kind of annoying, but at the same time, it also means the first third of the game is also really cleaned up gameplay-wise, as I effectively had done a practice run, the main run, and then a secondary main run to re-record it, so probably the best gameplay that we have across the entire LP. Now, you may have noticed right there, Mario actively came back and closed the door of that specific level when he hadn't done that prior. That's a very minor mechanic where he'll do that if you finish a level with more than 150 seconds remaining, if the timer even goes that high. So at the end of every 4th level, we do fight Donkey Kong, like I mentioned earlier, but at the end of every world, we do a more proper boss fight against him, usually involving him rolling barrels around the arena in some way, which you then pick up and throw into him. 3 barrels to the face, and he's out of the way, and thus we finish off a world. Now, Future Me probably already did some postscript editing talking about this in text, but also notably at the start of every new world, there's a prominent flashing effect as the world map screen fades in or out. So if you're prone to photosensitivity issues, at the start of every world, I recommend looking away from the screen until you can actively select the next level, as the flashing effect isn't the worst, but I can definitely see it potentially hitting some people a little harder than others. And with that, we also get our new mechanic introduction. We're going to have to deal with switches. I guess levers more accurately, but either way, they turn off or on certain mechanics in a stage. Sometimes it's platforms that go along a certain path, sometimes it's opening platform bridges to begin with. It really depends on the context in question. Though I do remember distinctly thinking in my first playthrough of this that I thought the levers felt a little sticky, because you actively have to hold down the B button to use them and then hold left or right to move the switch left or right to swap states. And something about that just didn't really gel with me on a first run. Speaking of which, I probably should talk about my history with the game, but first off, let's talk about the triple jump, because I just did 2/3 of it right there. So, a mechanic Mario has in this is a handstand, where you press down the A button and he flips onto his hands. While you're like that, you can actively bounce certain projectiles and other things off your feet, like falling rocks or the barrels that Donkey Kong throws. But while in the handstand state, you can jump again and go slightly higher, and if you jump immediately after landing from that, you'll go even higher. With that said, there is still a timing element to it. In fact, if you want to get the highest level of jump from that, you need to go to the handstand and immediately jump again without waiting any amount of time, and then jump again after that. And there's notably a distinct sound cue when you do that successfully. Compared to the triple jump in Mario 64, there's definitely more of a learning curve with this triple jump mechanic. But if you can master it, you can really break certain level designs in half, because you can just ignore a good amount of chunks of level. This is another good example of what the switches will often do. If they're not making bridges open or close, they're actively activating or even changing the direction of certain platforms. With that said, one of my least favorite enemy types in the game gets introduced here. I think they're meant to be spiders. The way they work is that they just kind of follow the architecture they're on across its entire perimeter. But with how the collision detection is in this game, there's times where it feels like I get hit by them when I really shouldn't, but also times where I avoid them when I really feel like I should get hit. Mario's hitbox in this game, I think, is relatively accurate to the sprite, but especially if you're holding a key, it's both larger and smaller than I feel like it should be at the same time. This is a really funny level to do fast. The way you're meant to do this level is that a gate next to the door is going to close, and you would need to platform up the conveyor belts and the rising platform to get to that switch and reopen the gate. But if you go over here and grab this ladder, which you're meant to use to go up there to get the hat, you can place it in the gate, preventing it from closing, completely bypassing the level at large. There's also the killer plants that shoot out bullets pretty slowly. The projectiles in this game are surprisingly annoying, if only because it's pretty easy to lose track of them with Mario's own movement speed, which is pretty fast, but levels like that are just a joy for me to go back to every time. So here for the first Donkey Kong encounter here in World 2, we actively have the ropes right out of Donkey Kong 3 on NES and arcades. Pretty easy to platform up, but the way it works is that you can press left or right to start holding 1 or 2 ropes. When you're going down ropes, holding 1 rope is faster, but if you're going up ropes, holding 2 is faster. You need to manage which ones you're holding and when in order to get to that level as safely as you can. This is also an example of what I was talking about earlier, where when you're handstanding, Mario can deflect a lot of projectiles, specifically barrels and falling rocks. Pellets from like the killer plants and all that will still kill you, but you're safe from above a lot of the time. So, either way, I was about to get into my history with the game. This is not a game I grew up playing on cartridge. This was a game I experienced relatively early in my days of emulation, like 2008, 9, 10, somewhere in that range. If memory serves, I was scrolling through, like, probably Cool ROM at the time, if I had to guess. And I saw this in there, and I just kind of assumed it was another one of the Donkey Kong Land and Country ports to Game Boy. But when I realized the year date, it felt a little weird. I actively looked into it, and well, I found something a little bit different, and I actively fell in love with it pretty quickly. The first playthrough was definitely a little rough, but once I actively learned to respect what this game is trying to do, it's actually, like, probably my favorite Donkey Kong game on the system. If you haven't noticed it yet, by the way, the mechanic set for this would actively be reused, just not as a Donkey Kong title outright. People familiar with a certain game on the Game Boy Advance that got a remake on the Nintendo Switch will realize this is actively the precursor to the Mario vs. Donkey Kong games. The first one of those outright is pretty much a soft remake with new stages and mechanics of this. And then that became sort of its own Lemmings-like series starting in the second game of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, which I'm glad that series is still around. I think it's one of my more preferred Mario spin-offs, only because it's something that's a little bit more unique than a lot of the others. Like, it's not a racing game or a party game, it's its own distinct thing. So something worth talking about is we went from World 1 being in a city to World 2 being in a forest. Largely, the mechanics that get introduced as we go through the game are usable in any given world, but there are times where specific aesthetics will have unique mechanics to them. Like I mentioned, there's going to be an ice world where there's mechanics unique to that. There's going to be a volcano world with kind of similar deals and all that. Largely, the mechanic you're going to see get changed the most is the enemies, where some will be exclusive to certain worlds, but have a lot of the same rules. Like, there's usually at least one enemy per world type that is damaged just by touching them, but there's also some you can just outright stand on. Like, to compare, the spiders here are a kill shot no matter what, but the ladybugs, I think, can only really push you around unless you hit them directly in the front, and you can stand on them, thus use them as a weapon against other enemies to begin with. And on that note even, there's two death animations that enemies will largely have in this game. Either being popped out of existence by things like the hammer, or being knocked off the stage and falling down to the bottom of the screen. When enemies die the latter way, their corpses can also kill other enemies if they're placed in a way to do so. It's not super useful, but there's sometimes where it can come in handy. Also, I haven't even talked about that yet. When you pick up the key, as long as it's in your hands, you're completely good, but there are going to be times you have to place it down or throw it to a platform above you. When the key is not in your hands, it is on a timer and will eventually start fading away. If you pick it back up during that, your timer will reset, but keep that in mind as you're trying to adventure around. If it starts blinking faster and faster, you might be in danger. That level's pretty fast to do like that, but if you have to do that the normal way, you're in for a potentially annoying ride, as the platform lineups in this game, there's times where, due to the length of tracks that platforms move on or the like, the longer you're in a stage, the more platforms can get desynced, and it might take longer for things to get back into a state you need them to be in. And due to that, there's times where, despite how dangerous it can get, you do actively kind of want to rush through stages, as it'll give you the easiest path forward. Largely, a lot of the stages have very fast ways to beat them, with or without respecting the intended route, but there's times where that's not always going to be the case. So yeah, look, we're in the final third of World 2, technically World 3, counting the initial 4 stages that are just outright from the arcade game, and we're already at 50 lives out of a maximum of 99. Again, lives in this game are pretty easy to come by. But I guess on the flip side of that, they're also pretty quick to lose if you're losing track of where enemies are, or if you take just too big of a spell from a fall and all that. Quickly going back to my history with the game, though, while a lot of my early playthroughs were on emulator, as are my more recent playthroughs, I think the way I played this game the most over the years was on the 3DS, as this was added to the 3DS Virtual Console really early on in that handheld line's lifespan. So if I wasn't, say, like playing a 3DS game outright or messing around with maybe some of the 3DS GBA Ambassador titles, all that, there's a good chance I was playing this pretty early on in there too. Which, honestly, getting ahead of ourselves here, good chance it's going to be a similar story for a lot of people experiencing this game nowadays, just not with the 3DS, but instead with the Nintendo Switch, because this is available through the Game Boy Online stuff, albeit that was relatively recently that happened. I think that was in, like, March or May of this year. But hey, pretty good way to play it, honestly. The enemies in that previous stage are some of the more annoying ones for me to get around for some reason. The way they work is that they're giant ears, and if you get too close to them or land on a platform, they'll wake up and try to charge at you after a second. And for some reason, I have been just historically bad about judging their speed versus my own movement and for jumping over them. And I don't know why. Also, fun fact, I technically played that stage completely wrong. You're meant to go get the ladder on the bottom right and climb up and then take the switch back down. But I've always just climbed up the platforms using the triple jump and backflip to get up there and then just climb down more safely. So for the proper boss fight here at the end of World 2, we now have the addition of springs, which work pretty similarly to how they've worked in other Mario games, where if you just jump on them straight up, you'll bounce slightly, maybe enough to get up to the next platform type, but if you hold down the A button, you get a lot of height, and if you play smartly with that after grabbing a barrel, you can hit Donkey Kong without even climbing up to the higher platforms. Usually in bosses like this, he'll throw the barrels in a couple of different ways, usually involving the terrain. Sometimes they'll roll towards the interior and then bounce off the walls. Sometimes they'll roll off screen to the right and left, all that jazz. Sometimes he'll just toss them outright. You really need to kind of figure out which throw he's going to do just by waiting a second to figure it out first. But I believe he always does them in the same pattern anytime you load into a stage like this. So if you die a couple times on a stage like this, you can slowly learn the pattern in which he's going to do things. And for our final tutorial of the day, we're now going to have diagonal ropes that you can swing on. These work the same way as the ones in prior levels. You just hold up and you slowly rotate. Just now you're going to be worrying about distance moved left to right rather than up and down. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to tackle World 3 and beyond. See you guys then.